Hello, this is Silas. I'm back with my friend Stephen. You can say what's up to everyone.
Hello, everyone.
We're back for a talk. We're going to be talking about a conversation about an essay on liberation by Herbert Marcuse, and we've done four parts before this. We did the introduction part. We did a biology foundation for socialism. The new sensibility was the second part. Third part was subverting the forces in transition, and today is going to be the fourth and final part, solidarity. So, Stephen, tell us a little bit about this essay and why we're talking about this.
Sure. So this essay was written by Herbert Marcuse, the Marxist philosopher from the Frankfurt School in 1969. I heard about this essay from James Lindsay. That's why I decided to read it, and we were going to talk about it. I think it's kind of interesting because it plays on some themes from his earlier works, notably Eros and Civilization, Repressive Tolerance, and One-Dimensional Man. It also took place after the riots in the 60s, both in the late 60s, both in France and the United States. And he was sort of reflecting on ideas he had written previously, what had happened, and also sort of the culmination of some of these ideas and the actions, and where, if Marxism is to become viable, where and how it would progress going forward.
Yeah, and as you were talking about, I was thinking about the culmination. That's something we talked about in the pre-talk to this. We're just talking about different things happening in society today. And part of the importance of this, part of what led to this, part of the thing was Repressive Tolerance actually did a reading of the actual essay itself for the part. It was the third part of a three-part kind of scholastic piece that Marcuse and two other authors did. And then we were kind of wondering, what else has he done? Because repressive tolerance teaches you a lot, informs you a lot about the things going on in society. And as Stephen mentioned, he heard about this through listening to James Lindsay, and James Lindsay and other people have been focusing on these things. And this goes into more of the things. And we were wondering, with society right now, what's happening? We are seeing the culmination of, I think, a lot of things that started with Marcuse. And he didn't invent some of these things. I think he was somebody who was observing what was going on. He crystallized it in a way, put it out in a way, and then other people took his ideas and actually started applying them in practical ways into society. And I think now we've seen the culmination of those things going into society. I think to as far as I think an idea can get into society until it is really actually challenged in a situation where now this is a fully fledged idea. It's a fully fledged part of society, and now it's going to have to compete on its own merits in other things. It's not going to be just secluded to some small intelligentsia group. It's not going to be secluded to some small enclave of some ivory tower in some place. It's like, no, this is actually out there dealing with people. Is this a thing that actually computes? Is this a thing that actually works? Like when you're developing something, I think you go through the planning point, the blueprints, and you do the research and development, and then you get to that point, then you actually do the marketing for it, then you sell the product, you put the product out there. And once the product is actually out there, once that vehicle is actually out there, let's say it's a car in that situation, there's going to be people who are actually dealing with that car, treating it in certain ways that you didn't think about in the actual in the drawing board parts. And then that's going to be the real test. Is that really going to be popular enough? Is that really going to be something that actually helps and works in that market of ideas, in that actual real world? And I think we're seeing that, in my opinion, it doesn't work. But I think now we're going to really see that this is actually something that's going to be, I think, a main aspect that now we're going to be seeing the general population, not just in the United States of America, but specifically there, dealing with some of the ideas that Marcuse had about human nature, specifically in the United States of America, and pushing into the world at large. And I think being informed about this sort of material will help you kind of make sense and not be so surprised and shocked about certain things that were done, and have a better idea of what might happen once these actual things interact with society at large. It was kind of rambled.
Yeah, and as I've said a few times, I wanted to read this directly, like with repressive tolerance, and actually form my own opinions. It's the same reason the authors, both James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose, wrote Cynical Theories, because we're trying to show that we've actually engaged, read, and understood the material. We're not repeating what we heard from someone else about it, or creating a straw man, then refuting a straw man. We wanted to engage the material directly, and then, yes, obviously we disagree with a lot of it, but it's like we did actually read it and consider it. Whereas, okay, how many people who would criticize people like us have read Mises or Rothbard or Rand? It's usually very few, if any, at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is for people who just want who enjoy this information, enjoy the actual knowledge, having the information there. And it's not just the people who are against these things that are aware about this. I think also the people who support, who claim to be supportive of some of these things, seem to be the very things that Marcuse has been warning about in certain situations like this. So it will also show you that these people, even though they claim to be about this stuff, they don't really know about this stuff as much. So I think people get concerned when they see certain people behaving in a certain way who seem to be really to really be is it convicted, to have very strong convictions about something, who seem to act in an emotional way. It's something that appeals to me. People think, oh, maybe they're right, maybe I'm the one who's wrong, maybe I'm the one who's missing things out. But no, once you actually see this stuff, you realize, no, even they're wrong, about the things that they're saying. Like if they were actually basing it on some actual solid thing, you'll realize that it's not actually as solid a claim that they actually make. And with many of these people, how often do you see them actually get to the point where they're willing to sit down and discuss the things that they're actually talking about? So I don't have time to educate you. It's not my job to educate you. Go educate yourself. Well, that's what we're doing in this, where hopefully we're educating ourselves, and through the actual educating of ourselves, like Stephen read this, you have to be reading certain paragraphs from it, then we discuss it. You can be somewhat educated on this content as well. And you can also let us know in the comment section if there's other parts of this. There's going to be links below to the actual PDF, to the actual essay if you want to read along with us, and the other parts as well. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I did a Zoom session recently with some friends I actually made via Instagram. One of them runs a satire account I can link you to. It's pretty funny, actually. And I was talking about living in New York City, and they were saying how being a leftist in New York City is basically just default factory settings. And I was saying, and I was saying that's a good analogy, but I always find it funny because some of them act like they're bold and edgy. I'm like, that's like saying I was Catholic in the Middle Ages, or I was anti-Semitic in Nazi Germany. It's like you're just going along with popular culture. Anyone can do that. To actually like read, understand the opposing stuff, and be able to stand on your own 2 feet with it in spite of criticism and popular opinion against you, that takes courage. A small child can follow popular opinion.
Yeah. And we were talking about this, that a bit, the transformation that's going to be happening in New York City and there's certain places where if people want to live by these ideas, they might be able to. From my experience, it doesn't really seem to make somebody happier. And I think people like that pursuit of happiness, which is part of the American dream, supposedly. It's part of the thing that's key in the United States of America. If you want to live in this kind of environment, some of the things Marcuse was pointing out and seeing, they were things of concern. And I think it's part of the pendulum swinging to the right, to the left. You can now it's most definitely to the left. Most of the institutions of larger influence and control in society do, at least if they don't lean left, this outright lean left, they at least give lip service to the left. At least they actually like, oh, we have to actually pay the dues. We have to actually pay our tithe to the leftist kind of socio-political atmosphere out there. So there's no more control they can have. It's kind of like it's the whole thing. Super Troopers. There was a scene where in the start where the cops are messing with these people. The cop is still behind him. He's like, pull over. It's like, we already pulled over. We can't pull over any further. It's like, that's kind of what I tell these people. I'm like, how much more to the left do you want to go? I mean, like, how much more equality in TM do you want to have? Like, what else are you going to do? So it's already as progressive, as regressive as I think it can get. So now you're going to snap in that, like, there's going to be some people who just absorb and want to live in this kind of way, and this is their default. And for some people, it's not. And we're going to get to a point, I think, where people are going to embrace their choice to associate with these people. You also realize you don't really have to live under these people, what these people are saying. Because if you agree with these stuff, good. Go and find the people you agree with and live in that kind of way. If you want to act like this stuff is actually happening, despite what actually is, then you're showing yourself as somebody who, at least for me, I don't really want to associate with people who are just willingly ignoring reality, or in some cases unable to actually see the actual reality. Now that could be me, who's in that inverse kind of way, where I'm also in this situation where they also don't want to deal with me. But that's okay. You don't have to deal with everyone. You don't have to interact with everyone. But I think for interacting with the people when you have to or when you want to, the more you know about what the people are seeing and experiencing and expecting is going to improve those interactions. So I think there's no real negative in my estimation of engaging in this conversation, and also thanking you for spending your time to listen to this, because there's a lot of other things you can be doing, but I think this is a valid way to spend your time to actually be more informed about this information.
Well, I think for a lot of people too, this like clinging to these ideas in spite of evidence, it's a narcissism thing. Adam Carolla had some good commentary on this. He was talking about California. He's like, these people ultimately have the, the narcissist, like the huge but fragile ego. And it's like, what if they won't admit that their policies are destroying the state, because you're basically saying to them, you're a Democrat. Yes. You voted for Nancy Pelosi and Gavin Newsom. Yes. They're causing these problems. Yes. So then you're wrong. And it's like, they don't, it's like, they don't want to bring themselves to accept that. So it's like, they have to build all these rationalizations around,
Like one of the things I just thought of today, the current president of the United States, Joe Biden, just gave some executive order on something with some kind of parts that are related to firearms, discussing due to some recent attacks and things like this, or there's a spike in violence against these people, or this one thing has occurred and we've noticed this group is lagging behind. Whenever they point out a big issue, how many of these emergency laws, emergency things that are proposed or imposed actually address, like if you say, if we had these laws, these policies were actually in before these things that we say we creating these for, what percent of those things would have actually prevented that thing from happening? And in my experience, I can't remember any that actually would have. I'm thinking they must be some, but where are they? Where are the examples? And that just, to me, that's kind of the thing that I'm saying. Like, how much more can the government actually claim to do for you, till the point where people just are like, we're just going to give up. We're just going to. One of my first conversations I had in this entire conversation series on my channel was with my friend Nick, and he's a much younger guy. He was living in New York City. I think he's still in the New York City area. And it was about private property. And one of the main questions was, can you sell yourself into slavery? And you can't. You can be enslaved by somebody, but you literally cannot sell yourself into slavery, because if you do that, it's by the action of doing it, there's some willing thing, so it won't be slavery in that situation. So that, I think, it's getting to the point where you're in that quasi-slavery, where you're literally in that matrix, kind of plug yourself into the matrix and just say they're going to do everything from you. We're already at that point where there's a certain percentage of the population that is completely willing to just have the state do everything for them. Now, I don't think there's people who would want that, who are not aware that the state could do that are still able to be convinced to go over there. Like, you've gotten to the point where as many people that are willing to do that are going to do that. The state has also gotten to the point where there's as many ways that it can do that and still maintain enough of a productive population for it to have the resources to parasite over in order to be able to do that, or in order to even have a country or a state or a location that they're willing to actually rule over. Is at a max. So where are we going with these things? And in part of that is because of some of the things that Marcuse was pointing out. When he was pointing these things out, we were saying, look at the world back then, and we can see some of these problems. But do those same problems exist now? Do the people who are using Marcuse's playbook, are they truly the ones who are struggling and coming up? Or are they the ones in power who are trying to convince the people who are supposedly struggling that they're actually doing this? Like, that's the thing. And I think for most people, if I can see this, I think enough people out there will also be able to realize that this is not really something that can actually be applied much longer into society. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to be more concise with my rambles.
It's okay. It's all right.
Rambles for a thing. Okay.
We can jump right in. I don't have a ton to say on this last section. Like I said, I mean, some of it's kind of stuff he's said already or that we've talked about. So it's like, I don't want to just repeat the same stuff over and over. Okay. But let's get into it anyway.
Yeah. All right. So we'll get into it. Stephen, as is mentioned, we'll be reading certain paragraphs and then we'll discuss the paragraphs. And in this format, I'm able to be a little more concise and more direct to the actual content than some of the start and the end, where we just kind of meander around. Okay, so this is part 4. So
I only have about 4 paragraphs or so. Actually, I guess it's 3. I guess that's 3 kind of bigger. Okay. Anyway, Under these circumstances, the preconditions for the liberation and development of the third world must emerge in advanced capitalist countries. Only the internal weakening of the superpower can finally stop the financing and equipping of suppression in the backward countries. The National Liberation Fronts threaten the lifeline of imperialism. They are not only a material but also an ideological catalyst of change. The Cuban Revolution and the Viet Cong have demonstrated it can be done. If there is immorality, a humanity, a will, and a faith which can resist and deter the gigantic technical and economic force of capitalist expansion. More than the quote-unquote socialist humanism of the early Marx, this violent solidarity and defense, this elemental socialism in action, has given form and substance to the radicalism of the new left. In this ideological respect too, the external revolution has become an essential part of the opposition within capitalist metropoles. However, the exemplary force, the ideological power of the external revolution can come to fruition only if the internal structure and cohesion of the capitalist system begin to disintegrate. The chain of exploitation must break at its strongest link. All right. Comments and thoughts? Yeah.
So here with the start, this is part of what we're mentioning, is some of the things that when he was writing this, that might have fit. And it could be a simple thing, just the language that he's using. Like this term third world, developing countries rather than third world. And who is the third world? You look at a place like China with its emerging positioning on the global stage. Is that a third world country anymore? Yet, quote unquote, China, like this third world country is also one of the countries that's actually now competing in actual this development of these supposed other third world developing countries in Africa. At least that's one of the major parts that's in there. But it's not just in Africa. You see the actual Belt and Road effect going into Europe, where there's a lot of European countries that are relying on infrastructure from the Chinese market. Now, these things, we are, it's essentially one of the main things with this is we already have achieved globalization. In my estimation, we've already achieved that. Now, the type of globalization, I think part of the problems, what I see most people objecting to as globalization, this sort of globalization, isn't necessarily the reality of the world that we live in, but it's people who had power in the older times, in that time when it was still states, trying to maintain their positioning of power in this new global reality that we live in. Yet I don't think that is necessarily something that can actually work anymore, because for that, you have to have certain things, like the certain nationalisms that go into it, certain xenophobias that go into it, certain preferential, I don't know if ethnocentrism is quite the accurate thing, because even a place like Japan, which is somewhere that is discounting the horrific World War II situation, but they came out of that, and they've been one of the most ethnocentric countries post World War II that hasn't been necessarily horrifically violent and negative to other people, but they've been very ethnocentric, and their population is dying off.
Yeah,
they have some of the worst debt in the world. They have other issues with it. They're still a rather peaceful, rather
civilized.
Rather civilized place. So it's not third world by any chance. But would you say that is a flourishing kind of thing? Is that something that other countries could emulate and copy? And I don't necessarily think it is. And I think you're already seeing Japan in certain ways realizing they need to open up to the world in certain ways. Is that going to reduce who Japan is? I don't think at all. I think that whole idea of maintaining Japan as it was pre-World War, to that time, going back to that kind of ethnocentrism, is part of what would actually end up with Japan no longer existing in the future, because it will just slowly crumble. But that's maybe a thing, but on the side. And I think one thing I'll also touch into that is when he mentions the Cuban Revolution, the Viet Cong have demonstrated. What have they demonstrated? And I think that was a time when that stuff was still fresh. So at that time, you were seeing these uprisings. Yeah. But what has the result been 50 years after those things? And I don't think anyone would want their equivalent of the Cuban Revolution or the Viet Cong starting in their country, because I don't think they would like the 50 years down the road kind of situation that we see in Cuba and that we see in Vietnam. Vietnam is doing better off than Cuba, but I don't think we'd want that.
Yeah, so I have a few comments. So I was going to say, I mean, the whole third world, first, second, third world thing doesn't even really apply, because originally first world meant, capitalistic sort of democratic nations. Second world meant communist powerful nations, and third world what we'd call developing nations, and like they could have been on either side, but they were sort of figuring out their place. And obviously both the first and the second world each wanted them on their side. So people still use that expression. I mean, I'm not one of these people who's bothered by it, but it's like it is kind of a misframing of the issue in the present day. Because then like the other thing too is like, you know, people would talk about, oh, Africa's full of third world countries, but then it's like, well, wait a minute. I mean, South Africa is and still would be classified as technically a first world nation. Countries like Moldova and Eastern Europe would be considered third world living standards. Like they say, I'm not going to say it's common, but it's been said that Moldova is one of those places you may pass out, wake up missing a kidney. Like that type of thing happens there. Like it was one of those countries that just like collapsed after communism and just didn't get its act together. Now I know a country like Georgia was the opposite. Georgia, they said, like really bounced back strong. So, you know, that gets into governments, private property, how that was managed. You know, that's a whole thing in of itself. I want to say, I mean, Castro came into power in the late 50s. So at the time he was running this, it had been about a decade. But again, I guess it was tough to say much about Castro. I mean, aside from the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I don't know if word got out yet about all the blacks and gays being put in concentration camps. Marcuse may or may not have known about that. Who knows? The Soviet Union, that stuff had come out already. This, I'm not sure. Vietnam is kind of an interesting case because they, you know, they eventually became more capitalist, and they actually like Americans now because we come over and spend money, and they call the Vietnam War the American War, which is, you know, kind of funny. But, you know, obviously they're in a much better place now. Let's see here. It's interesting. He uses the word faith. We talk about the religious themes in Marxism. There you go. What else was I going to say here? External revolution. Oh, yeah, and I was going to say this is also a very Leninist argument, the idea, because they were trying to figure out why was there a Marxist revolution only in Russia, which was one of the most backward countries. Like, I think Marx himself actually thought Russia would be one of the last countries, because the idea was it would probably happen in, like, Britain or Germany, which were way more modern, but instead it was Russia. And one of Lenin's theories on this was that because those countries had outsourced their exploitation to their colonies, so the idea was they were getting rich off the backs of the people in the colonies. So then people took this later down the road and said, well, to spread capitalism, we have to reach out to these people and get them to overthrow their governments, and then they'll help spread it worldwide. That was one of the reasonings behind this.
And with this, I think one thing I'd like to see is also the elemental socialism in action. When they talk about that here, I wonder, what are these elements? I mean, I know they're meaning elemental in kind of more just general sense, but I want to use that, like the elements. What are the primary elements of socialism do the people think haven't really been enacted in the West in general, like in the United States of America, besides the universal health care? But you already have Social Security, you already have Medicare, you already have Medicaid, you already have a lot of like, the Obamacare type of thing, or the Affordable Care Act. There's already type of things. If you go to a hospital, you'll still actually get some care. They're not like, oh, it's going to kick you out. Yes, you might have a lot of bills after. There's issues to do in there. But then what systems they think are lacking? The public schooling is there. The public transport is there. Like these facilities, there's the welfare state.
Public housing
is lacking, huh?
Like public housing, like Section 8 housing and all that. Yeah.
What exactly is lacking that they say, oh, we're actually living in this capitalist space? I think it's, as we mentioned before, I think it's more like neo-fascistic, where you have these private entities that have been granted monopolies due to their favors with the government. So the government's like, instead of us having to actually try to control these things, we're going to let you or certain fields, let a few major parties be dealing with it. You have your competition in there. So as long as there's 2 or 3 of you guys battling together, we can say that's not a monopoly. But as long as the 2 or 3 of you guys all give our like through the lobbyists and the revolving door between the different industries, and we'll kind of just coexist together. And you have that kind of situation where that's who the top people are. That's who the quote unquote elites are doing. So that system is already in there. I think at the top it's neo-fascistic, but for the average person, there's lots of socialist actual elements already in the actual society. So I don't know how much more socialist people think it can get. How much higher do you really think the taxation can be? How many Americans would really be okay with 50% taxation? I don't think that many. Like, I don't think enough to actually vote on that actual thing. Whenever you hear, oh, we need to raise the tax here, we need to pay their fair share, there's never numbers tied into that.
No.
Very few of those people actually understand how much of a percent of something like income tax the top 10% pays, and something like 70% of the income taxes are paid by the top like 10% of the country. Most people would not be able to say that, and that's the thing. Like that's what I'm saying. We're getting to a point where these things cannot really get pushed over too much further because these things have lasted due to ignorance, not because of people who are informed and still support these things. It's just people don't know what they supposedly say that they do support. Yeah.
Well, somebody I know just shared that meme of Bernie talking about like, oh, the billionaires have seen this much of an increase in their income during this pandemic and all this. It's like, well, okay, guys, you're the ones cheering on the lockdown. They're shutting down small businesses. Saturday Night Live can still film with a live audience, and they can make fun of small business people trying to stay open. They're all hugging each other and stuff, no mask, anything. These people are already millionaires. It's like you're supporting all the policies causing this. Like they don't see the connection. And this is why I get so angry at these leftists. It's like they don't see the connection between the policies they advocate and the effects. It's like, oh, just tax the rich leave. Oh, well, we need to raise the money. Okay, tax poor and middle class. Hey, why are things so expensive? It's like, what did you think was going to happen? You know, if you have millions or billions of dollars you can afford to leave, people are not going to just say, yes, I'll stay here to pay 60-70% of my income. Who would do that? I mean, I think it was Sean Hannity even talked about like, you know, even if you just, you know, he has marginal rate. I don't know if he still lives in New York, but he did for a time. And he's like, marginal tax rate. Then you have to add on state and local taxes. New York City has its own tax. There's various hidden taxes. You add it up, it's over half the income. And it's one of those things where like, yeah, you can afford it, but it's like, what do you get in return? Like, I don't want to just give away half my money for nothing, essentially.
And I've seen them two things on this. I've seen them mention a global corporate tax rate. They think of bringing in like a global corporate tax rate, and those are the things that I'm talking about. These are places where these people who had systems that could limit, it's you able to take a certain limited area and say in this area because people want to live here enough, we can do this kind of thing. So I think they're trying to position themselves in a point where we'll still have this power instead of having this situation where people can just go to Bermuda and put their money in there. It's like, no, we'll have a global tax rate, and then they need to convince everyone to do it. But when you have this kind of thing with thieves, when thieves work together, part of the reason thievery and these kind of things just don't work is because by the nature of these people, they're going to find some way to get around this. One of those thieves breaks out of that agreement, and everything crumbles all of a sudden. Like there's no honor among thieves. You can't trust a thief because you know that thief doesn't trust other people's private property by virtue of them being a thief. So these kind of unities, these kind of groups, they're not going to be able to work. It's just an interesting thing to see, and I'm forgetting what Jen, the press secretary, she said something like, if we raise the tax rate, they're not going to raise prices. Like she literally just came out and said that. And these are the kind of things, this is the same thing that whenever I come across people, religious beliefs, I wonder, are people saying that because it somehow makes them feel better? I get that on the regular people, then the people at the top, I'm like, is that a true believer? Does he really believe that you can raise the corporate tax rate or raise the tax rate on business productions and manufacturing and things like that, and those companies are not going to actually, or is she just so detached where she has so much money or she doesn't deal with these things where it's like the things she's used to actually dealing with, she doesn't notice a difference because maybe half of the things that prices would change are already coming through the state, like her housing is paid for, maybe her car is paid for, so she's not really noticing the difference in like the gas prices. Like it's such like a basic one-on-one thing. People say these companies are evil and bad and they're horrible, so like they want to make profits. But somehow, if you raise the cost for them actually making things, they're not going to raise the cost. Maybe it comes from them thinking like, oh, these companies are actually sitting on millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So they're just going to let it eat into the millions of dollars and they can afford that.
My response to this is always, I think when people hear corporate tax, they think like, oh, the rich guys at the top will pay all the taxes. They don't understand that's a tax on the company as a whole. And the thing is, if the company as a whole gets taxed, they're not going to just voluntarily take a hit in profits, research, development, all this. They're just going to say, okay, we're going to have to raise prices in order to pay it to keep profits what they are or higher. Because a corporation run by a board of directors, responsible to shareholders. CEO is appointed by the shareholders. They're responsible for keeping the corporation profitable so the stock value stays high. They're not going to just let all of that fall so the government can get more money. Like businesses are not like businesses don't open for the sake of making the government money. You know?
And people should see this. That's what happened during the pandemic. There was certain businesses were closed. There was less money coming in. How many businesses were able to just remain open or just maintain their way of existing because of this supposed massive, like I said, they're not schools. They don't have these endowments or just billions of dollars sitting there to be able to go. Most of the businesses have been working and going the way they are in part due to the people coming in. It's a constant thing. Yes, a company might be making $10 million of profit a year, but that company's actually earning like 500 million that year. And that 500 million is coming, that 10 million that they earn only is taking off the top from that 500 million. If you just cut down 50 million of that is no longer coming in, it's not like, oh, everything else still comes in and then that just cuts now like it doesn't only cut out 500,000 from that 10 million profit. It's if you're no longer able to make it to the 500 million, there is no profit. That's what people don't understand. People think it's like, oh, if you're making 10 million profit over 500 million and it drops to 450 million, then all you're going to be making is 8 million profit. It doesn't work that way.
No.
They must make the 500 million first in order to make any profit. So if you take away the ability to make that 500 million first, the company won't exist to even begin with. So it's people don't get that. It took me a while to get some of those things too. So that's what I'm saying.
Sure. All right. I think that's all I have. I'm just going to go to the next paragraph. We have indicated the tendencies which threaten the stability of the imperialist society and emphasized the extent to which the liberation movements in the third world affect the prospective development of the society. It is to an even greater extent affected by the dynamic of quote-unquote peaceful coexistence with the old socialist societies, the Soviet orbit. In important aspects, this coexistence has contributed to the stabilization of capitalism. Quote-unquote world communism has been the enemy who would have to be invented if he did not exist. The enemy whose strength justified the quote-unquote defense economy and the mobilization of the people in the national interest. Moreover, as the common enemy of all capitalism, communism promoted the organization of a common interest, superseding the inter-capitalist differences and conflicts. Last but not least, the opposition within the advanced capitalist countries has been seriously weakened by the repressive Stalinist development of socialism, which made socialism not exactly an attractive alternative to capitalism. More recently, the break in the unity of the communist orbit, the triumph of the Cuban Revolution. Vietnam and the quote-unquote cultural revolution in China have changed this picture. The possibility of constructing socialism is on a truly popular base without the Stalinist bureaucratization and the danger of a nuclear war as the imperialist answer to the emergence of this kind of socialist power has led to some sort of common interest between the Soviet Union on one side and the United States on the other. All right.
Again, this is a massive, like, is that the reality of the world today anymore? Like, some of these things have changed, so you kind of have to rethink, and this is part of why we mentioned before, a lot of the people who support these things seem to need to act like we do live in the 60s, like we do live in the 70s, when that is not the reality of the world. Think about some of the people who would be on this side, this regressive side, this leftist side, following things in Marcuse. How did they react to the so-called isolationist policies of Donald Trump?
Yeah.
If they're so much against imperialism, why did they object so much to isolationist policies? If they're so much against imperialism, why are they very quiet on what's happening with China in developing countries?
Yeah.
That Belt and Road is the way going these places. I've heard people just completely praise these things. I'm like, do you know anything about what's going on? Like, I don't think you actually do. I don't think you realize that, oh, China's come in and built these roads for these people. Like, have you seen those roads? Do you know how those roads are built? Do you know is that road even needed? Or does some politician in some African country decide, oh, the people in my tribe, in my tribal lands, have voted for me. So I do understand that if I bring up this project, I don't have to fund it. Like the Chinese government's actually going to come in and they'll spend $10 billion to actually build this project for me, and I'll be able to get my cut of my $2 billion somehow. And then they kick back to the Chinese government or the people in there to the laundering, that kind of system. They get their $2 billion somehow. Then $2 billion kind of gets sprinkled around in the system, and they're hiring the Chinese people coming in and things like this. And then we have some kind of inflationary thing where it takes some time for this thing to be built. And then once the road is built, even if the road works, there's like 3 people using that road.
Well, I was saying what you just said now, I thought of somebody close to me. I won't mention by name, but like the whole imperialism thing, like when Bush was in charge, they were like, oh, another Texas cowboy like Johnson getting us into these wars. It's costing American lives. We're spending money. Obama comes in, same stuff, no comments. Trump, oh, these peace deals are just to please his buddy Netanyahu. Why is he doing this? It's like, do you actually care about imperialism, or is it literally just team signaling? It's just this person's on your side, you defend them. This person's on the other side, you attack them. And that gets into my recurring point of, do you actually care about these values? Are you a principled person, or do you just pick a side and go along with it?
That's the thing. Like, it is that side things. How much do they know about the information? Like you said, do they know? Yeah. Do they know that most of these things, if China is building a road somewhere, in the actual case, in the actual what's it called? In the actual contract, chances are they're also getting access to some resources somewhere else in that country that for much longer. And there's that whole thing where people say, oh, the white people came to the Americans and they took things from the natives, but that's what's happening right now in places. And they talk about a place like they say here towards the end. They talk about the common interest between the Soviet Union on one side and the United States on the other. Think about how that's been treated. Like, they're trying to bring back, and again, this is back to that 70s, 60s thing with the USSR. Like, they're trying to bring that kind of big bad. But if there's any good things being said between those people, do people right now who support these things think they actually are common interests between the Soviet Union and the United States? And if they say they are at common interest, so we should be antagonistic, at least the United States should be antagonistic to the Soviet Union and vice versa, then do they understand that, oh, according to what Marcuse was saying, that would mean something has changed? Does he actually believe that this whole situation of the enemy whose strength justify the defense economy and the mobilization of the people in the national interest, and he's talking about important aspects of this coexistence has contributed to the stabilization of capitalism. World communism has been the enemy who will be invented if he did not exist. Going back to what I was asking before, what are these elements of communism or socialism that they think have not been implied, have not been actually put in? And this is also something that I tell people on the political right that I think I'm advising them. This whole idea of putting out that socialism boogeyman out there, people don't really care. Like, people like socialism for themselves. Like most of the people, some of the people I think on the salt right and the very rather reactionary right side would be completely okay with a complete socialist ethno state. The socialist policies themselves, people are not necessarily against those. So it's not really a winning thing. Socialism, just think about, Stephen and I agree that communism and socialism should be as taboo a term as fascism. Yeah. Like the USSR, Mao should be up there with Nazi Germany, but it's clearly not. These are things that are a lot more palatable than people are trying to make it seem like. It's not. The one thing that I'm still glad about is it's just not going to happen. It just literally can't happen. If it's attempted. Sorry, if it's attempted, it'll crumble, but it can't last. So at least on that aspect, I'm happy enough with that.
Well, because I was thinking I was going to share this meme I saw of Larry Reed, who worked for FEE, where he talked about how there's this weird double standard that statists have where they expect the market to get everything perfectly, but if the government screws up, oh, well, the government meant well. It's like, think about the stuff that Stalin and Mao did. Imagine a private company started starving employees or executing people. Even one company did that, people would freak out. But if Mao starves 50 million Chinese, oh, well, he meant well, and he was said to have said, in a Politburo meeting or something about how he would starve half his people to feed the other half. It's again, imagine if today in the modern society, a company didn't give its employees adequate lunch breaks or something. That the people would be outraged, and that's at that. Whereas this guy was literally killing people.
Yeah. And not even just that. Imagine if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez actually said that.
Yeah.
Like, imagine if Bernie Sanders actually said that and wasn't on this democratic socialism type of thing, which is just essentially populist fascism. Like, they have to couch this in other terms. They have to hide the information. It's not that people know that to have socialism, they know that to have communism, this is what communist regimes have done. This is what socialism, full-on socialism actually is. They don't know that. They don't know that those calculations are made. And that's why I think, like, if anyone actually got even close to actually getting a situation where that was happening, the people would revolt against that. People would not accept that. It's just people have this false idea of what socialism actually is. It's not what most people think it is. So I think what it actually is, I'm just looking enough at people, and there's enough options. There's enough positive things. The things that people want are given in ways that socialism cannot give them, that people would not be willing to give up for the promise of this socialist utopia at the end of that. So I think that's something that keeps me confident.
Well, I was going to say, too, James Lindsay has a video. Originally, it was subs only, but it's public, I guess, today, about medical Lysenkoism. And Lysenko, for those who don't know, he was a Soviet biologist. He basically believed the whole theory of genes was completely made up, and he tried to create a Soviet biology. So basically, the idea that plants could evolve, could, I guess, maybe evolve in some way to become more cooperative, that if you planted them in the cold, they would somehow adapt and become resistant, all this. You could argue that his policies ultimately led to, in part, not just his policies, but along with other things, led to mass starvation, both in the Soviet Union and China. And I posted a status a few days back. I'm like, if you don't know who he is, you were indoctrinated, because he was the chief architect of a lot of this stuff, which led to these millions of people starving to death. But again, it's like, and the point Lindsay is making in the video is you're starting to see some of this woke insanity creep into medicine, which is very scary, because what's going to happen? Oh, white people are privileged. They're not going to get medical treatment. Oh, a black and a white person are wounded, and the white person's more severely wounded, but because the black person's oppressed, we have to give the black person treatment first. Like, that's the concern. These sorts of ideologies creep into things where they really don't belong. And it's just, it completely undercuts reason. It completely undercuts science. And then it ultimately will lead. It could lead to many deaths, and it's one of those things, like, I will almost actively fight against if I have to, because it's just this crosses a line for me.
Yeah, but just like you said, like, I consider you to be a moral person. I consider a lot of other people to be very moral, and if they realize that's what it was, they would stand up and fight as well. And I look back in the past, I don't think the average person in the USSR knew what Lysenko was up to.
No.
And if they heard that, they didn't have enough knowledge about just basic agriculture to understand that what he was talking about was nuts.
Yeah.
So it's just think about the things when they actually say, think about how long it actually took for them to rehabilitate the Green New Deal in the United States of America. And that's, to me, why I'm thankful for people like AOC. If it was somebody else, it was like a Nancy Pelosi, she'd have taken some time to lay the ground, brought it out slowly by slowly. And even with the Green New Deal, that was building up. That's not a brand new kind of idea. But it's been built up by other things. But when AOC came by and just dropped it out there in its raw form, when people actually started reading it, they're like, this is ridiculous. Like, we're not going to do this. Now they have to kind of get people, hide it away. Now they bring it back in different ways. They're saying now everything is infrastructure. They're talking about, like, childcare is infrastructure. The climate is infrastructure. Oh, we shut down. We had to have a global pandemic to have the shutdown. Now we're going to try and tie that into the actual climate change. So these are things. In order to actually get some of these things, look at the tricks that they have to actually pull to actually get even just a small amount of these things passed. Because if they actually brought you the information, people would just be like, no, we're not having that. So that to me is a thing that continues. That's why we make content like this, because we're just saying, if people see this, we're convinced that it's more that not enough people have seen this. It's not that people have seen this and agree with this. It's just they're like, okay, even like we said with Marcuse, the things that he'd seen, I think if he saw what was happening right now, he would object to it. Like, I'm rather confident that he would. But that's the thing. Seeing is the first step of it.
Sure. Let's see if there's anything I was going to say. Let's see here. And more of a common enemy of capitalism. Yeah, it's interesting. He talks about the sort of the split within communism, though, because he talked about that. I know there was a point where Mao basically renounced the Soviet Union. This was after Stalin's death, actually, with Khrushchev. I didn't know this, but apparently, I guess some meeting, I guess Mao and Khrushchev actually yelled at each other. That was sort of like the split of, like, I guess it was like, and that's why in the 70s they opened relations to us, because the idea that, well, we're still communists, but we're not really friends with the Soviet Union, so let's try and warm up to the U.S. I know the former Yugoslavia, of course, kind of split with the USSR as well. Like, I mean, it was always independent, but it was like it went a little more capitalist and sort of was a little friendlier to the U.S. Of course, Cuba was allied because of the whole missile thing. Trying to think what else. Yeah, so yeah, it is kind of interesting to see that breakup, and like he was sort of seeing that. And then in the 70s, of course, there was détente, like I say, China opening up. He did denounce Stalin, like I said. I don't know how much came out about Stalin. I'm trying to think if the Gulag Archipelago, which year, that might not have been out yet, but I know, that was Khrushchev gave that speech by this point. I know that there was footage on satellite TV of what happened in Hungary with the tanks firing on protesters. So I think this is, at least people were waking up in general that the USSR wasn't workers' paradise. It is interesting, though, because today I've seen a few Marxists online. They go either way with this stuff. Like, they'll either say, oh, Stalin took a backwards country and turned it into an industrialized power, in a few years, or it's, no, Stalin was a monster who killed millions of people. But I think within Marxist circles, they're kind of unclear which side to take, because it's either, okay, this guy did get a lot done, but, or it's, oh no, he was a monster who killed lots of people. And for me, it's like, if you're going to use the he got a lot done, it's like, you could point to cotton output in the South pre-Civil War. It's like, oh, the U.S. produced all this cotton. Yeah, it was done at the points of whips, canes, guns, It's like, yeah, and then nobody would say those ends justify those means. It's like, would you say, but like, would you say that about the Soviet Union? And if so, why? Oh.
And that's why we come back to the whole thing of the different times that we're living in.
Yeah.
Even when the Gulag Archipelago, as you said, that was in 1973. That was probably, how long did it take for that to go out? But now you see someone like Glenn Greenwald, although he's a socialist, but some issues with him. But when he has an expose about something, people actually see about it and hear about it, and it's very quick. I think he just recently had some big expose in Brazil, where he lives, about some issues that are happening in the Bolsonaro government, and I think the Lula da Silva or something like that was released from jail. These are things, but then he comes on, he has his Twitter with his followers, he has his Substack, he puts it out there, he goes on the Jimmy Dore show. Like, these things are immediate, like these are things going out and people are hearing these things. So if you have something like the Gulag Archipelago, as I've mentioned before, how would something like the Holocaust happen again? Imagine if you had like 2 million accounts of Jewish people in Germany, and then all of a sudden these Twitter accounts have started going away. How many of them would be able to sneak it in and send a photograph, then Instagram accounts, like, this function, it just go viral? Like, some of these things couldn't happen. Like, if Lysenko said something as dumb as, oh, you just put the plants in the winter and then they'll all of a sudden be winter plants, like, that will just be, a clip of that will just be one. Even I make fun of the people like Trevor Noah and these people, but he'll just be like lampooned all over the place, Yeah. People would not be able to get away with some of these things anymore. So I think those are the things that kind of bolster my trust and say, like, yes, these things are horrific, and there's actual example of how horrific they are, but it's not that people has seen that. So those things were that horrific because people didn't know they were that horrific. The Holocaust occurred because nobody had actually had information about what happens before a Holocaust occurs. And I think that's why some people are super triggered about that's why there's so much strength in calling someone a Nazi today, in saying, oh, this is going to happen. Like, that's why these words are used. And these words, look at how minor of an issue these terms are actually used for. That's because we realize how bad that they can get. So that's already in the human infosphere, the knowledge sphere. So I think those are the things that will be breakers, circuit breakers from us getting to those horrific points. There might be some brand new horrific things that I haven't thought of yet, but I don't fear those horrific things of the past, because I think we have the past to be aware of how horrific they were. Yeah.
Well, because James Lindsay makes this point about the woke too, that like if the woke were to get power and implement their agenda, it would be a totalitarian nightmare and a lot of deaths. But I think afterwards, obviously I don't want this to happen, but if it were, like Stalinism or Maoism, it wouldn't be embraced again, because it's like people lived through it. We have all this video footage. We have Tiananmen Square. We have the Cultural Revolution. Like, even if the average person on the street didn't know about it, it's like with the internet now and everything, if, like, let's say a country became fully woke, they implemented all this stuff, people starved, medical Lysenkoism, all this, other countries are going to see that, and all these other countries are not going to be like, yes, we should do that here too. That's the future of mankind. It's going to just destroy their reputation. So then it's going to be like, I think, classical Marxism today. It'll exist in enclaves in the internet, people who say, oh, it wasn't implemented correctly, we didn't get it right. But it's going to be very hard for it to catch on as like a mainstream idea again.
And none of these things are popular enough to take control of any massive country. But I think we're heading towards a world where you get to have places like you'd mentioned. Moldova. Where did you mention that country in
Moldova? Yeah, it was part of Romania originally. Yeah.
So you have places like that, but then you have also places like Monaco, I think it is, and these Liechtenstein or places like that, where it's essentially like it's essentially a city. It's essentially a city of the ex-burbs. That's the size of it. And I think you're going to come back to a point where ostensibly that's how it is. Like New York City and the like, even when they're talking about the numbers in New York City, like with the pandemic and things like that, it's if you've been to New York City, like Stephen lives there, I've lived there for some time, it's actually 3 different states meet together. And those are like the city itself is about 8 million people, like proper, like New York. But then you count the ex-burbs and things like that, it goes up to like 25 million, 30, 35 million people, because you counting the suburbs and all those places in Connecticut, in New Jersey, in New York, like those places all together. Some people even draws people out from like Delaware who are essentially just in there. So you're going to have those kind of places where I think you'll have places where the structures of the government are going to be in a way where you can't get it popular enough for just the people in the more rural areas, in the more urban, like suburban, no, the rural areas, the rural areas. You're not really going to be able to push those in those small towns. Some of those things need a certain size, a certain density of people in order for them to actually even be countenanced. To get enough people together who believe and want to try these absurd things, I think you need them to be in those kind of areas. And you'll have certain cities test those things out. But I can't imagine how could the entire United States go woke? I can't see that happening, but I can see like San Francisco getting woker. I can see New York City getting woker, where it's like we're a sanctuary city, where we're going to have our own kind of terms and things. And if you live here, these are the things that you live by, and people will accept that. And then you'll have the counter where other ones will have a more conservative place. We'll have a more, like, I think like in Utah, they still have things like that, where like Salt Lake City is still very tied to the Mormonism and things like that. I think you might start seeing that. Certain states might go woke, certain areas, but I can't imagine it going into like, I can't imagine even like the entire France becoming woke. Like what kind of country, that's one thing I wonder, does Lindsay expand on that? How does he imagine this? Who would actually enforce this entire wokeness on the entire country? Like, I don't see that happening.
Well, I think the fear is it's going to be like Mao's Cultural Revolution. Like they're going to try to indoctrinate kids and college students, basically turn them into soldiers as like the vanguard to use, But then again, it's like how fragile our youth are. I don't know if that's even possible.
Because
it made a little more sense in that time, because remember, China was a nation of hardy farmer peasant types, and they had been through some civil wars and war with Japan. So like with Russia after World War I, anything seemed like an upside for there. So you had these kind of like hardened, traumatized people, but it's like our youth who are offended by everything. It's like, could they really do that? I don't.
That's what I'm talking about. They're coming from different stock. Those people were hardened. They were ground to the ground. They were at rock bottom. So they were reaching for anything. But the people now, they were being preached strength. But right now, the wokeness is preaching weakness. It's enshrining weakness. And these people are coming from a place, they have so much to lose. It's not that they have so much to gain by being woke. They're heading to wokeness because of the things they fear losing. So I don't think, like, these are not the people that I see out there being the foot soldiers. These are the people who point and want somebody else to met the violence. These are people who are about proxy violence. Yet these other things, the different things, these other things, they were able to enrage and encourage the populations to actually engage in the violence. I can't imagine them actually being, like, these things have been voluntary. These shutdowns have been voluntary. These mandates. You just saw that recent thing with a preacher, and I think it was in somewhere in Canada, where he's just like, get out, get out. It's like, Nazis.
He was a Polish guy too. So that was cool. Yeah.
He was like, you abhorrent people, like you horrible people, like
He called them Maoists, which I thought was
yeah.
cool. Like he
He was
correctly
like, you
identified.
psychopaths. How dare you? How dare you come in here? And you see, that's the thing. Like they would need the laws behind them, and then they will need to actually come in and enforce them. You just can't. I just can't see the practicality of that actually happening unless there's like some solar flare, and then all like the technology that we have kind of whistles down. Like, there's so many things that would have to happen for me to imagine that happening, because we aren't in the 60s. We aren't in the 50s. We aren't in the 1800s. We're living in 2021. It's current year, man. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, too, these are the people who want to take guns away. You know, they alternate between only police should have guns and then defund the police, and then no, citizens should have guns. The Constitution's outdated, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, you know, that's a whole joke about what is it? One side has guns, the other side has bongs and dildos. it's like, you know, it's like you expect me to be terrified of you, really?
I mean, reality wins out, and this is an anti-reality movement. So I don't have much hope in it actually lasting.
All right. I actually have only one paragraph left, and then we can just any concluding thoughts. Okay. The construction of a free society would create new incentives for work. In the exploitative societies, the so-called work instinct is mainly the, in parentheses, more or less effectively, introjected necessity to perform productivity in order to earn a living. But the life instincts themselves strive for the unification and enhancement of life. In non-repressive sublimation, they would provide the libidinal energy for work on the development of a reality which no longer demands the exploitative repression of the pleasure principle. The incentives, quote unquote, would then be built into the instinctual structure of men. Their sensibility would register as biological reactions, the difference between the ugly and the beautiful, between calm and noise, tenderness and brutality, intelligence and stupidity, joy and fun, and it would correlate this distinction with that between freedom and servitude. Freud's last theoretical conception recognizes the erotic instincts as work instincts, work for the creation of a sensuous environment, the social expression of the liberated work instinct is cooperation, which, grounded in solidarity, directs the organization of the moral of necessity and the development of the realm of freedom. And there is an answer to the question which troubles the minds of so many men of goodwill. What are the people in a free society going to do? The answer, which I believe strikes at the heart of the matter, was given by a young black girl. She said, "For the first time in our life, we shall be free to think what we are going to do." I didn't include much else because it's the usual. You know, in my ideal society, human nature would change and people would put common good above their self-interest. People will evolve to do this, blah, blah, blah. You know, I don't mean to straw man him, but it's like, it's a lot of the usual Soviet new man stuff, which we've already talked about, and it's not really worth repeating, at least for me anyway.
I'm wondering, was this young black girl Angela Davis?
No. Well, she would have. I mean, how old would she have been at this time? Unless she told him a story about when she was younger or something.
And or maybe just compared to Marcuse, he could have considered her young. If she's in her 30s, that was already began. Because people still say they're still young. But anyway, this is the thing. Like again, we're talking about the new incentives to work. That's already happened. We're already living in a time when there's so many different reasons for people to work. And part of the thing is also saying like that kind of oppression, that kind of control of societies takes work. Yet, majority of the people involved in these movements, these ideological movements, are averse to work. They're not looking for incentives to work. They're looking for incentives not to work. You know, they're like looking for reasons not to actually be involved. So they become weaker in that sense. I don't think they're capable of the actual effort that it would take to run a society, even in the kind of society that they want. They want other people doing stuff for them. Yeah. So I think that's a key part of that. And post-pandemic, we're about to see a massive change on the global economy. Part of why the global economy has been as I think constrained and restrained as it is because we've been living on the realities of the previous existences, with the limitations, with the embedded interests, with the people who had their power in the past, trying to keep that imperialist power and things in this new globalized world. And we're going to see big changes in that. People want to restrict people's movement in a different way, or people want to incentivize movement and ship people around in different way, traffic people around in a different way. This is kind of the infrastructure of the world, I think, has changed. And I think infrastructure, not in that childcare's infrastructure sense, but I was listening to like I think that Bill Whittle was on the right angle. He was talking about the definition of infrastructure, and he's going into the actual breakdown of the terms. And infra is some kind of like underground things in the structure.
Yeah.
So it's about transportation, it's about moving things around. It's about the things that are involved in the structures of society. Like you can't have a city without the infrastructure, all the things that are not seen, the power lines, the sewage, the sort of the conditioning, those kind of things, even just the lines of the buses, those kind of things are infrastructure. And the world, some of the things that were built on a different kind of reality with the different limitations, with countries, with states, with smaller areas, without the information, which is the main thing. That the primary way we built infrastructure, the primary way we built societies, was to find a more effective way to make the most out of the resources that we had. And in most of those cases, if somebody was capable of doing X, they had to be at actual Y location in order to do that. Whether it's directing the people directly, telling them this is what you have to do, or actually going in and fitting the part into this thing in order to do it, that had to happen. Now you live in a situation where people are flying and think they're just developing a new plane that can break the sound barrier without actually having a sonic boom. So once those things kind of come, you talk about like Skylink with the internet, like you would have like a full gig internet anywhere in the world. You have this thing with people just doing video conferences. So you don't need, person X doesn't have to drive 500 miles across the country in order to actually help Y in that location. He can actually just send it. You can even just do it from his house and have a printer do it there, or like a robot. Or there's so many different ways to do these things. So this whole situation, what he's talking about with these new incentives, construction of a free society would create new incentives to work. I'm comparing the ways of working in the 70s and 69 when Marcuse was writing this, thinking about the incentives people had to work then compared to now. And I don't know if you could have had Marcuse sit down at that time and say that, yes, right now we have these 1,000 incentives. And in a free society, I think we'll have 2,000 incentives. And I think we've already reached a situation where if you could say something like that, maybe we're already at 4,000 incentives. So by his estimation of what incentives would happen in this supposed free society, we've already surpassed that in a sense. So I some of these things, I'm just wondering, are you trying to solve a problem that does not exist anymore? And that's part of what I see with one of my main objections to a lot of the things people actually say, like the wage gap, these institutional racism, like these are things that don't necessarily exist in the way that they claim exist. So I'm wondering what they're fighting at.
Well, so I had two comments right away. So infrastructure, it's interesting that term comes up because when Marx said infrastructure versus superstructure, infrastructure, he referred to the economy as the infrastructure. The idea is that everything was happening through the economy, and the superstructure were the things outside of it, like culture, religion, all that. So he believed that the material dialectical process or dialectism, I'm trying to think of the word to use here. But basically that was what was driving everything. And then the culture, music, art, religion, all that was influenced by that. Now, where Gramsci and the Frankfurt School, they did the opposite. They turned that on its head. They argued it was culture that was driving everything, and then the economic outcomes were results of that. That was sort of that harkening back to Hegel, emphasis on culture rather than economics. So I guess Marx would have seen it as, well, the bourgeoisie were predominantly white, but because the bourgeoisie work in their own interests, they were keeping blacks out of economic opportunities. The Gramsci types, I don't know how much Gramsci talked about race, but definitely his successor for sure would say it was, no, it's white people are oppressing black people, so white people give their buddies the good jobs and things and promote them and things like that. And then that in turn leads to the economic disparities. So they essentially turn the Marxist paradigm on its head, but they're still operating in that oppressor-oppressed dichotomy.
Yeah, but why are they even different? Isn't culture more preferences and beliefs, and then the economy is just the practical applications and behavior of how you actually act out those preferences and beliefs? Isn't that essentially it?
Well, yeah, but you're looking at it through a Misesian lens. They're looking at it through this dialectical Hegelian and then Marxist lens.
I mean, like, and that's the thing.
I'm trying to represent them fairly and not strawman them, but like this, but this is like, you know, kind of what they would say, that, you know, like, because again, it's that bit, that's where the Hegelian view runs so counter to ours because we look at history as something that's just happened. It was the culmination of all these decisions made by various individuals. You know, different people had power, some didn't, all that. Whereas they see it as history is shaped by the world spirit, which becomes the absolute spirit in the process of mankind perfecting itself to the end of history. Yeah. Yeah. Again, I don't subscribe to that, but I'm trying to be charitable towards how they saw things.
I tried to listen to I listened to that video that you sent me, like Hegel in like 36 minutes, and it's just like, it's woo stuff. But these are the things I'm also thinking, they just had limited information. Like people before we knew about the germs, about the germ theory of disease, people were talking about humors and pixies and all. It's not because they were just like, oh, we know the truth and we're just going to try to mess this up. It's like from the limited observations, and for some reasons they just couldn't add those two things together. How many times does it take for me to actually hear a concept? Like right now I'm re-listening to certain audiobooks that I'd listened to in the past, and like one in specific I'd listened to Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great. I'd listened to pretty much all his debates on YouTube. And he brought it up several times talking about the germ theory of disease and how most religions actually, that is the primary thing. It's a major thing that they were explaining. A lot of the things, like if people knew that, they wouldn't actually have come up with it, because it would explain so many things that people used religion, these theologies to explain. Like, oh, demons and things like that, cursing, if you do certain behavior, you're cursed. Because people didn't really see, they saw if you're acting in this way, in this environment, and you're dirty and you're unclean, you seem to be sicker than the people who are clean. So since they couldn't understand the germs, they'd say it was a demon entering. But if you understood germs, you wouldn't need to go to the demon thing. But that demon thing was an attempt to let society know. It was developing the culture to change the actual behavior of the people in that sense, in what they knew. But then I remember there was like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I was walking to the gym and I was listening to something else. I don't know what I was listening to. And then all of a sudden it just came to me, and I even made a video about it where I was like, germs explain. If people just understood germs, there would be no religion. Like all the religions that existed now wouldn't have existed if people understood germs. And I had definitely listened to Hitchens say it like before, years before, but for some reason it hadn't really struck me as much. And now re-listening to it, I'm like, oh man, like he said this all this time. So that could be part of what Hegel was doing. That could be part of what Marcuse was doing. That could be part of what the people hear, because they're hearing some of the things that the people who are following Marcuse are quoting and saying in a certain way. And they realize, like, yes, what's happening on the border is horrible, AOC. That is horrible. The kids are in cages. But they don't understand the practicalities of the coyotes who are actually bringing those kids over. They don't understand that when you change certain policies from what Trump was doing and having those relationships with the people, say, we'll build this wall and we'll figure out. And even part of the reason it stopped is because he was even talking to the leadership in Guatemala, in Colombia, in those places, and saying, look, the way it is right now, anybody who's able to actually make this trek is leaving your country. And this is your younger people. These are the youngest people in your country. The youngest, fittest people in your country are leaving and doing menial labor in our country and sending you that money back. Sure, that's happening. So you're getting $10 million a year from these people. But if these people stayed in your country, even if 5 million, even half of them stayed in your country, you would be getting the 10 million from those half that are in there, and you'd still be getting the 5 million from the half that actually end up going through a more legal and understood process. So these people started saying, yeah, let's just have them actually in the country. And then now you change those incentives around, and you do that, and then all of a sudden this thing explodes. Those people who voted in Biden truly, honestly, most people I think truly, honestly thought him coming in would reduce what's happening at the border. And now that they're actually like, wow, it's exploding. There's going to be 2 million. It's being projected 2 million people coming in. And it's projections are talking about 2 million dead from the. I guess you need those 2 million to come in to make up for the 2 million that supposedly died from the pandemic. But but 2 million illegal immigrants are supposed to come in America. That's a lot of people. So this is the thing. I think people just don't know. They just don't know. They're trying their best. They just don't know better than they do.
I get a little annoyed with, I'm going to generalize here, but leftists more generally, is that like they don't seem to draw this connection between policies, incentives, punishments, and then the results of those. So like, for example, they're talking about like, oh, there are too many black people in prison. Oh, let people out of prison. Don't arrest these people. Let these people go. Hey, why is crime going up in our cities? It's like, you take punishments away, bad actors are going to do their thing. It's like, why does this have to be explained?
Yeah,
Oh,
but
you get the kids can cut school. There's no the consequences. You're going to get a lot of kids cutting school. I mean, it's like, what do you think is going to
yeah,
happen now?
I think it goes to that key thing, like you're saying, if with the Hegelian concept, the culture is separate from the economy, and that has filtered through the cathedral, it's filtered through the indoctrination system that most of the people who support some of these policies have been on. That's a language that they use. So it's in there. Maybe subconsciously they think it's not. There's no connection between people's cultures and their economics, or the economics that actually develops their culture. So they think, oh, these people's cultures are all relative, the cultural relativism. So as long as you just change the economic axis, like it doesn't matter what your culture is. If every culture is given $10 million to start with, supposedly there's going to be similar results for those $10 million. I'm not going to realize that those different people, due to certain cultural aspects, they will spend that in different ways. So yeah, I think that's frustrating.
All right. What else was I going to say here? Let's see. Oh yeah, so the thing about incentives for work, I know Che Guevara and others talked about like that, giving like ribbons to productive workers and all that. I think they called them like moral rewards or something. Um, I find it kind of strange in a way though, because it's like these are the people who complain about hierarchy and talk about equality, but then it's like he talks earlier about how the general wearing medals is vulgar, but it's like, aren't you kind of recreating something like that with that sort of system? And also, aren't you creating hierarchy again? Because then people will look at each other and say, hey, this worker has more medals than that worker. They're being better recognized. But then it's like, if that incentive is gone, well, why are they going to work harder? Like who was it? Somebody said about restaurants in the Soviet Union or something. The service was terrible because there was no tipping. And then somebody said regarding factories, they said they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work. It's just like, it's like this. Like, do you really think people are going to just randomly decide to work hard because? I mean, yeah, it's very strange view.
But yeah, that's the thing. Maybe that is it. And I guess that's a positive thing, is because we've talked to some of these people and they never give the because.
No.
So maybe that literally is it. They just think it'll happen because magic. Like they literally just think it'll happen, and that's true, because there's many things that I don't really understand how they work, and if somebody told me I had to have an opinion on it, I could only get to a certain point. And since I know that it's a thing that actually has to work somehow, maybe you'll get to a point where I'll just stop. But then you live in this society where everyone is like, oh, there's no such thing as a bad idea. There's no such thing as a stupid question. There's definitely stupid questions. There's stupid questions, but I don't think, I agree with that in the sense where I don't think there's a situation where there's a question you shouldn't ask. If you have a question, I think ask the question, but your question can be evaluated as stupid or not. But so maybe it gets to a point where they just don't know, but we live in a society where they are incentivized, or they're put in a position to think that their opinion is as valid, or their opinion should be treated as valid as anyone else who's actually on it. But like you said, the inverse on that is they're the same people who will also say, but the experts this, but the experts that, but then it's also choosing which experts when on what topics.
Yeah. You're not a climate scientist, you can't comment. Oh, here's Greta Thunberg, a high school dropout. Oh, well, here's Judith Curry, who was a climate scientist on a board at a university. Oh, well, she's probably paid off by big oil. It's like, what is this? It's like, just give me the experts that confirm my bias. That's all I read that as.
Yeah.
We're not even experts. Greta, I would just say people.
And maybe this comes down to that. Maybe, like with this is an essay on liberation. And it comes back to that situation. How are they defining liberation?
Yeah.
And then at the same point, even for us, like I've been talking about how the enslavement that people are talking about doesn't exist anymore, but it's been such a part of human nature that those instincts are still in us. We listening to The Moral Animal, which is one of the by Robert Wright, which is one of the first major books I read on evolutionary psychology, and that's such a young field, and maybe that's part of what's in this as well. It's just that drive. We're so used to being on a constant watch of getting more liberty, getting more freedom, getting more choice, getting more control of our environment. where if we sit back in the past, if we ever sat back and were like discomfortable, I'm like, oh, we're actually free, oh, we're actually safe. That was tantamount to suicide if you were ever in that way for most of humanity, 99% of humanity. But now we live in a time where you can actually sit back and just be like, enjoy this and be like, we actually achieved something. But for many people, maybe their system is still like, no, because what are they people like? What are women really asking to be liberated from? You look at the average life of somebody who wants to be a stay-at-home mother, in compared to the drive that humans have had to reproduce, which is why we're here. This sort of environment that the female human animal has had to experience in order to actually successfully raise a human being, the challenges they had to go through were just so much more oppressive than the average middle-class American female would actually be subjected to if she just found a male that was producing enough, lived in a home that was relatively okay, and just was a stay-at-home mother raising her kids. And that has been what has driven the human species, that reproductive instinct. But yet, somehow, a major part of that population currently thinks being in that environment is something they need to be liberated from. Yeah. So just like we're saying with Marcuse, what kind of thing was he talking about? Liberation from what? What was he envisioning in his time that they need to be liberated from? So what are the people today envisioning that they need to be liberated from? What is the average female feminist with a PhD in gender studies, gender-studies, with multiple years of that? What does she think that voting for Bernie Sanders will liberate her from? Like that's kind of what I'm kind of wondering. What do you mean by liberation?
And I also say too, like, what realistically can be achieved versus what is some hypothetical perfect ideal that exists in their minds. It's just, again, it's a socialist thing of trying to create heaven on earth. Yeah, we can have all these great visions of a perfect society, but how are we going to get there? It's like this is where this is where the magic comes in, because if a Christian says, I believe in heaven, we already know we're dealing with a mystical. But if they say, in my perfect society, we should have such and such, how will we have it? Oh, I don't know, we'll get there somehow. They don't see that they're making the same leap of faith.
Yeah. I think that's it for me.
Which I'm really excited to talk about in the next series we're doing. But let me just see if there was anything else here. Pleasure principle, that's Freud. Obviously all the Freudian themes. I posted that thing about Freud recently, how Freud, as far as I know, was wrong on a lot. I mean, he did pave the way for some other people, and I think, like, I guess you could sort of say it was something like Aristotelian physics, where he made a lot of errors, but then people started with stuff that he did and then fixed the errors and got things right. And I do know that Freud also was one of the people who identified that child abuse was dangerous. To be fair, I mean, some of his stuff was pretty wacky in my opinion, but I think he was at least sort of the start of that, so that's a good thing. I don't see Freud as being evil the way Marx was. That's about all I have. Like I say, the rest of the essay is pretty much stuff we've been saying. So
and I think that's another thing. There's many people, and that's part of why this going back in history and reviewing things and being like, okay, maybe we should cancel this person, maybe we shouldn't listen to this person anymore because they also did this and this. It's not necessarily a bad thing. That whole thing of reviewing what happened, and I think right now there's many parts of society, like people like Freud, who have been the foundational things of many things that are still primary in society, in the socio-political sphere, that we haven't taken the time to go back and review. Like maybe there was 2 or 3 things that were key parts of what he was talking about that are completely wrong, or we've changed the information on it, that we need to actually either put that aside or reevaluate and just recalculate some of these things. I think once we do some of these things, we can actually realize that, hey, okay, that's, why do we believe? Like that's the next one we're going to, like, is it why we believe in God, or why do we believe? Is that the
it's why we believe in God, but then it says in parentheses S so next to it, so it's like God or gods. It's what it's implying.
And some of these people were essentially gods. These are people who, in that classical sense, like gods. Somebody who was a god was somebody who created existence, and it wasn't necessarily everything. This whole idea of monotheistic gods that created all of existence, the entire world, even people who don't know about that person, is relatively new. Most gods were the gods of this limited location, this limited area, these limited things that were known by those people. And that's the same thing. Marcuse was a god of a field. Freud was a god of a field. He created the field out of thin air, pretty much. And gods were not people that you would question because they were the ultimate creators, they were the ultimate authorities on that. But now you can actually, the gods of today are people that you can actually go down and have a YouTube page, or have some local page or something. You can go on those people who are actually creating, like a James Lindsay who's coming up with different ideas and things like this. Even like a Bernie Sanders, even whoever these, I don't know, whoever you want to think of who's creating something brand new is creating it in a more interactive way. And I think there was also something that I listened to. I read this letter Marx wrote to somebody back in the '69. It was like, I don't know, but that whole situation, these were regular human beings. But we look at them as godly figures. But now the people who are doing work that's similar to theirs, or I would argue even better, even more significant, we see them as regular human beings who have Instagram pages, who have Facebook pages, who have Twitter. You can actually interact with these people. So I think we need to bring these people back and realize these are human beings, fallible. Yeah. And why do we believe in them? Like, why do we give them that kind of godly type of default system where it's like everything they said was right and we're just going to take it for granted that that's the way things are going to be and that's the human nature. They knew all there was to know. That's not the case at all. So I think it'll take a good time to actually come and review some of those.
Well, that's why I think it's important to differentiate too about like, well, what they were right and wrong about, but also in the context of their own time. Like I mentioned about Aristotle's biology, how much of it is held up even to this day. I mean, obviously he didn't have a microscope. He didn't know what cells were, all this, but he had ideas of, okay, these are different organs. These serve different functions. This, the heart is here. They used to think the heart was actually what the brain did. Obviously we know that's not the case. And that was actually what, unfortunately, that was one of Aristotle's mistakes that got internalized because people just kept reading that. And I think in the Middle Ages, people believed that was true because Aristotle said so. And of course, we know obviously later. So that's the other side of that thing that you're talking about. On the one hand, brilliant guy, obviously, right, paved the way for a lot of things. But the dark side of that is that people held on to a lot of his errors too, and that some have argued that actually held science back because for a while it was, well, Aristotle's brilliant, who could beat him? Let's just go by what he says. And obviously, he did make plenty of errors. Yeah.
And I think to finish off for me, I'll just quote this last line again here. Sure. It says, "For the first time in our life, we shall be free to think about what we're going to do." And I think that's something that people take for granted. People take for granted how much time you actually spend thinking about things. I don't take it for granted. I really enjoy having this time where I can spend with Stephen and talk about these things and get the access to these resources. And I also understand how flawed my thinking is, how much my thinking has changed on certain topics. And it's maybe because people feel like they think, so if I thought it has to be right, but just understand that. Yes, the world can get better, but do understand, if you're listening to this, you are living in the best known time that we are aware of. Yeah. Doesn't mean it's going to be the best ever, like forever, but realize it took certain things in order to come this way, and it's not impossible. The horrific things are not that far away in our history. So it's just something to remember and something to think of, and yeah, that's it for me on this.
That's all I have. Pretty much stuff we've said. Right, sure.
Thank you all for listening. We'll be back with the next series. As Steven mentioned, it's going to be why we believe in gods. In parentheses, whatever. We're coming back with that. Thank you very much for listening to this. There shall be clips already coming up of the different ones. As you said, this is the 5th part out of 4 others. So if you listen to this one first, give those other ones a listen. There's other things in the conversation series there. Like, share, subscribe. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Stephen. And say bye to everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Record. Siri, record.